ahead. Let me know when we can start.
Okay, everybody, nobody's watching YouTube at the same time, right?
No. Ed, let me know when
We're good.
We're good?
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Board of Selectmen, Highway Commissioners, Cemetery Commissioners. Before we begin, pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, subsection 18, this meeting of the Dudley Board of Selectmen will be conducted in total or in part via remote participation. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at dudleyma.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so in the following manner: by YouTube and/or posted link at www.dudleyma.gov. Please join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of
the United States of America,
America,
to the republic which
stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first on the agenda is the consent agenda, which encompasses the acceptance of minutes of February 8th, 2021, and accept but not release executive session minutes of February 8th, 2021.
So move, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
Motion and second. Roll call vote.
John Marcy, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Jay Johnson, aye.
Harry Siganovich, unanimous. Next on the agenda, we have the town administrator's report. Mr. Ruda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few updates tonight by way of updating the board relative to the local vaccination program and the hard work done to reach out to local cases and conduct it in the conduct of our contact tracing. Roberta Johnson is reporting that we had about 821 cases since April that we've followed, 821 active cases. She's handled 721 of them, including the contact tracing that is required for each case. So I know I review this a few times, but it's important that the public understand that 821 cases oftentimes has 5 or 6 contacts associated with it. So that's 821 with a multiple factor of 5 or 6 per case. So it becomes quite a lengthy process, and we appreciate her ongoing effort with that. On Friday, the town has seen its lowest number since November 10th, with the total active cases on that day dropping to 28. But we finished the week last Friday at 45. So since the program began on January 22nd, the Board of Health, including our health agent and public health nurse and Board of Health assistants, have assisted well over 600 Dudley residents, predominantly in the first phase of 75 and over, which is the most vulnerable in the community, in receiving their vaccinations. And that important program continues. And it's going to continue as long as the supply chain of vaccination remain intact, right through the final phase of eligible vaccine recipients. Our emergency management division of the fire department is also working on a daily basis to navigate the ever-changing guidance and eligible COVID-19 related costs that are eligible for reimbursement through FEMA, and that is quite the process. So we appreciate the chief and his team's effort for that as well. Snow and ice removal. So the highway superintendent reported to me last week that we're approaching the end. We're getting close to running out of money in the snow and ice account. We started the year at 95,000. As of today, when I checked before posting last week's payroll and so forth, we were at about $20,000. But as the board might recall, we voted to overspend that account we're going into March, so this is not untypical of where we usually are, at this time on any normal given winter. Actually, we're probably a little ahead of the game, so just want to update you on that. Our budget outlook for FY22, as we begin our FY22 budgeting process, we're having a rosier picture painted for us at the state level than we did last March in terms of local aid. However, we will be in a position of beginning the new fiscal year, most likely in a deficit, as we await again for reimbursement for FEMA eligible expenses. Without having seen any of the final revenue numbers, we can anticipate revenue from permitting and meals and hospitality taxes, land lease agreements, some pilots. Of course, our host community agreement with DMA is behind. So those receipts will be a little bit down, but we have a slightly rosier outlook at this point than we did. And I say that very cautiously, than we did 4 or 5 months ago at this time. Let's talk about the dams that we're responsible to take care of, which seems to be a constant struggle for us, particularly in this climate. The dam and seawall grant applications are due for submission this Friday, which is the 26th. The town has been working with the engineering firm Weston O'Neill to address dam inspection and mitigation requirements as we continue to research and look for a source of funding to begin addressing some mitigation needs. The grant application window for dams and seawalls was open late this year, and they gave us a very short time frame for submission, which is of course due to the pandemic. While we have been otherwise distracted over the course of the pandemic, we have still made every effort to meet our requirements, to plan for and address the issues with the most critical dams in town, and have explored the possibility of applying for grants, including exploring another option for an MVP grant more recently. Chief Kochanowski also explored a mitigation grant option through FEMA, which was unfortunately unsuccessful. That said, we plan to review our application materials with Weston O'Neill tomorrow. When I say we, it'll be Bill and I. And that will give us a few days to turn around the final application for submission. It continues to be our goal to explore as many options as possible to protect the general fund from the cost of the regulatory mandates that are associated on an ongoing basis with town-owned dams. That should do it for my report, Mr. Chairman, unless there are any questions from the board.
Anyone have any questions? Mr. Marcy?
Jonathan, did they give you an estimate of when we might get the numbers from the state? Last year it was like way after we even
We
approved
have a
the budget.
local aid number of what the governor's proposed number.
Okay, so we can run with that for
We're
planning.
plugging that in. We're going to plug that into the budget now. I
Okay,
talked to Representative Durant. I don't think it's going to be much more or more or less than that number. I think everybody's pretty much on the same wavelength.
okay,
We realized, I think, 3% more revenues than they originally projected. And they're working to pass that on, through local aid and other means. So
okay,
we're not where we were projected to be in 2019, but we're certainly not as bad off as we were, 9 or 10 months ago.
got it. Thanks.
Anyone else? Mr. Ruda, how many dams does the town have to take care of in the town?
What is it, Bill, around 11? It's 11, and they're all in varying degrees of functionality.
Okay.
Some need to be immediately addressed. Some are not, some just need to have ongoing inspections. But of course, those that need to be addressed, they can come with about almost $1 million price tag on some of them. Certainly not a cost we can absorb through the general fund at this point.
No, certainly not.
So, John, just to add to that, I spoke with Keith from Weston O'Neill, and he did send over an outline for a letter. So he said that possibly where the selectmen are the highway commissioners, we may want to have one or two of them fill out a letter. So they don't require a great deal, but maybe half a dozen letters or so that budding residents or officials from the town that should draft a letter to send out along with the grant request.
Right, and that's part of the grant request that is due on the 26th. So, Mr. Chairman, there may be a letter or two coming your way that you wrote through Michelle that you'll need to sign supporting the need for grant funding to address our dams.
Certainly. Let me know if it needs to be signed. I can make my way over.
Okay.
Any other questions for the town administrator? Mr. Ruda, do you need us to vote to accept your report?
Sure.
Chairman will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Roll call vote.
John Marcy, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Jay Johnson, aye.
Terry Siganovich, aye. Unanimous. Next on the agenda is a public hearing, Central Mass Regional Planning Commission. It's to start at 6:45. It's 6:46, so we're good. This is to discuss the fiscal year 19 Community Development Block Grant Performance Hearing and the fiscal year 19 Community Development Block Grant Unexpected Funds. The Chair will open the meeting at 6:46 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Andrew Lowe from the Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission, or CMRPC. As most of you know, CMRPC is the state designated regional planning agency serving Dudley and 39 other cities and towns in Worcester County. Tonight's performance hearing is part of Dudley's FY 2019 Community Development Program, which was funded by a $274,225 Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG grant, from the federal government through the Mass Department of Housing and Community Development to the town. CMRPC serves as the grant and project manager on the town's behalf. So what's the purpose of a performance hearing? A performance hearing is a required part of all state CDBG grants that's to be held near the end of grant funded activities. It includes a brief summary of activities funded by the grant and provides an opportunity for questions and comments from local officials and the public. Anyone outside of this Zoom right now who has a question or comment should send an email to townadmin@dudleyma.gov. Again, that's townadmin, all one word, @dudleyma.gov. They should include their name and street address, and then they can be added to the Zoom discussion if they have a question or comment. As the selectmen and regular watchers of the board's meetings will know from recent presentations, this grant has provided funding for two fairly substantial planning studies. The first of those is the ADA Self-Evaluation and Transition Plan. Completion of an Americans with Disabilities Act Self-Evaluation and Transition Plan is a requirement of the ADA and has become a prerequisite for a growing number of state grant programs. The Center for Living and Working was hired by the town to help evaluate current town services and facilities with reference to the ADA and to develop a plan for enhanced accessibility for disabled persons. Programs and services were evaluated and detailed reviews of the town's facilities and parks were performed by the consulting team. The plan was presented to the public and the Board of Selectmen back in January and was made available for public comment and has now recently been finalized. Priority recommendations from the plan include improvements to sidewalks and ramps throughout town, improvements at the parks, especially at the town beach and Crawford Field, adoption and communication of certain ADA related policies, and some limited improvements to several town buildings. There were no major building related obstacles, which is a first for the experience. I think Dudley has done a good job of keeping up with your main public facing facilities being ADA accessible in large part at least. So the second plan under this grant is the Jericho Brandon Infrastructure Plan. So Ty and Bond engineers were hired to investigate water, sewer, stormwater drainage, roadway, and sidewalk conditions in the Jericho neighborhood which is the area a little north of Stevens Mill, Chestnut Street, Oxford Ave, Green Street, that area, as well as the adjacent Brandon Road area, where a lot of the existing infrastructure is either aging or getting towards poor condition. A detailed field survey was conducted over several months last summer and fall, and a plan for improvements was prepared. The consulting team, along with the town partners, developed 5 specific improvement projects, each intended to be funded primarily through various future grants. Recommended project areas going forward include Oxford Avenue, the Green Street, Oak Street, West Chestnut Street area, the Village Street, Mill Street, Ardlock Place area, Fairview Avenue, and First Avenue. 2 public presentations were held during the planning for that project to allow for citizen input. One just a few weeks ago here with the Board of Selectmen. The draft plan is now ready and will be posted very shortly on the town's website. I hope to be working with the town administrator's office in the next day or 2 to get that up so folks can take a look at the full plan. The last element of the performance hearing is just a quick discussion of some unexpended grant funds. A little more than $7,000 in grant contingency funds are currently unexpended and not under contract. These funds can be used for additional work on the 2 projects that were funded by the grant, or with state approval could be reallocated to other CDBG eligible activities. We don't need a decision tonight on what these funds are to be used for. This is the requirement here is simply to have a public discussion of some of the options. So one factor to keep in mind is that the grant technically expires at the end of March. So we have to be cognizant of that deadline. Not to say there couldn't be an extension, but it would have to be approved by the state. Options for the use of the future funds are kind of threefold. One of those is simply to add a little more work to the 2 projects that were done under the grant so far. And I have been in discussions with Bill Scanlon in planning and George Petrinos in water and sewer about possibly adding a little more sewer investigation to the Jericho Brandon study to try to fill a couple of gaps that George is interested in learning where some sewer laterals are. So that's one type of option. Another type would be to try to take the 2 planning documents a little further into an implementation stage, which, you know, it is $7,000, so we'd have to be realistic as to what could be done along that line. But it could be something like using a little money to do some ADA work on sidewalk ramps in a few locations. And then aside from those, you know, any other project that's eligible under CDBG in theory could be done using these funds. Again, it isn't a whole lot of money and we don't have a whole lot of time to do so. So at this point, that's all I need to cover per the rules of the performance hearing. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments from either this group or from the public. And again, if the public are interested, they should email the town administrator at townadmin@dudleyma.gov and ask to be added to the Zoom discussion.
Thank you, Andrew. Does anyone have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at my email right now and I don't have any inquiries from the public here.
That was pretty thorough, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Let me look at and we covered both parts of the public hearing, correct? The grant performance and unexpended funds? Okay.
Yes, indeed.
And no one has any questions? No one reached out, Mr. Ruda?
Nope.
All right.
The email address one more time, just in case people didn't get it.
Sure, it's town admin, so that's all one word, at dudleyma.gov.
Mr. Ruda, should I keep the public hearing open for a few more minutes just in case someone comes through? Or could we push those questions for another meeting? How would you like to do this?
If I may, I could suggest that if you wanted to temporarily close the hearing and give it 10 or 15 minutes and see if some questions come through, then you could reopen it at a time of your convenience. I'm willing to stick around for a bit.
Okay.
Andrew, when do you need to know how the town wants to use that remaining $7,000?
There's no set deadline, but like I said, the grant technically closes in March. So I'll interact with DHCD to see what the likelihood of an extension is. I suspect they'll be fairly lenient given the pandemic and how that's thrown off a lot of timelines. But I do think, if it's in the next couple of weeks, that would be a good thing for us to, get towards closing this grant out. Because we don't yet know what the threshold for expenditure or closure will be going into the next grant round. So for folks who aren't familiar, the town has to either have spent a certain portion of a previous grant or have closed out a previous grant in order to be able to apply for a subsequent grant. So we haven't yet heard what the rules will be for the next grant round, but we should be cognizant of those types of deadlines as we make a decision on what these funds could be used for.
I think the two options, or the three options that you mentioned, the first two make a lot of sense, either implementing some of the ADA requirements or adding to the infrastructure planning project. I'm sure George has a lot of ideas as how to use $7,000 to help figure out how to run a system. But so either one of those ideas, I think I would support very highly.
Thanks, Bill.
Well, hearing nothing else, I will close the public hearing at 6:56 p.m. Mr. Ruda, do we need a vote to accept this, or are we good just moving on?
I don't think we need to vote to accept it. I think it was just pretty straightforward public hearing.
Oh, it was. It's very informative. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we have the highway superintendent presentation, snow and ice road trip. Ms. Murray, how are you this evening?
Not too bad. How are you?
Doing excellent.
Good. Let me see. Can pull this up here on. Okay, so I need to be able to share the screen, I guess, John. If you can give me the ability to do that.
You'll just have to turn it back over to me. You should be all set.
Okay.
You'll have to make me the host again after you're done.
Okay. Let's see.
There we go.
Okay. Okay, let me see here. Okay, so is that showing the slides?
It is.
Okay. So to start out with the this is on the comparison between liquid de-icer benefits over the traditional rock salt or sand mix, or simply rock salt. So basically, requires a lesser amount for the liquid de-icers in relation to sand salt or a rock salt mix. And studies have shown that, like it shows, as much of it as 80% of rock salt sand mix can be taken away with only 5 vehicle passes. What happens is when a sand salt mix or a salt mix is spread on the roadway surface, it gets a what they call a de-icing bounce, or it's actually just blown off to the sides and becomes ineffective. Essentially, what you're trying to do with any of the de-icers is lower the temperature of where water freezes. So one of the things that kind of suggesting or taking a look at is the ability for the highway department to make its own salt brine. The equipment required is shown in the picture here. It's basically stainless steel apparatus that take rock salt, put into the machine, mixes with water, and once that solution reaches a 23.4% solution, the salt stays suspended in the water, and then that's pumped off and stored into poly storage containers. So this machine is capable of making about 3,000 to 5,000 gallons of salt brine per hour. The calculations for the cost I've shown on the next slide here. So these calculations are based on the per ton of rock salt calculation of about 850 gallons per ton that you've developed. So the amount of time that it would take to create that, figuring the loader with an operator at about $50. The brine operator itself for the machine at about $25 for that period of time, and then the cleanup cost around $10. So brings you at a labor cost of about 10 cents per gallon. The brine maker, the cost of that's about $50,000, or just under. Repairs and maintenance for 10 years would be $5,000. The residual value is a negative 5,000, and then the annual total would be $5,000 for assuming 100,000 gallon production rate per year. Put the cost for the actual brine or the equipment cost at 5 cents per gallon. So if you figure our current cost for salt per ton is just under $50 a ton. I've used 50 just for easy round numbers. Water cost, I've put it at $1, and the electricity cost at $1, which reasonable, seeing that we don't actually incur any of those costs. But the overall cost for the material, I'm sorry. The overall cost for the material is about 6 cents a gallon. With the labor, equipment and materials, it puts it at about 21 cents a gallon. These are the comparison between rock salt and salt brine. So truck pre-treating with a straight salt mix uses about 250 pounds or to 350 pounds of salt per lane mile. With the salt brine, that number is about 30 to 50 gallons of brine per lane mile. Or in comparison, typically what you would do with the spreader would be a 2-lane application. So you're actually treating both sides of the roadway at the same time. So those numbers would obviously double. 500 to 700 pounds per lane mile for the salt, and 60 to 100 gallons per double lane mile. So if you figure the rock salt material comparisons, and these are just the material itself for rock salt per lane mile. If you're using the previous calculations, $6.05 to $8.45 per lane mile. Given that there's about 83 miles of roadway in the town, puts the cost for treatment of that at about $502 to $701 per treatment. And then with the salt brine, again, just materials only, about $1.80 to $3 per lane mile for the material. And it puts the total for coverage for 83 miles of roadway at about just under $150 to just under $250. And again, materials only. So the other thing to consider too is when you're using the liquid de-icers, you'd be using those as a pre-treatment. It's not the only solution. You still would have a need for a rock salt, after a storm. Salt brine would be used primarily for pre-treatment, and I mean in some instances possibly afterwards. What it does is it gives you a better scrape down on the roadways after a storm event. Doesn't allow the ice to build to begin with, and it's already in a form that the rock salt wants to be in. It needs to get broken down, and I think you'll notice on the roadways, if you see where they've spread rock salt, it actually doesn't start to work until it is broken down by traffic and it starts to mix and melt down the snow or ice and work itself into a brine. You've already done that with spraying the brine mix on the roadway, and this can be done up to 8 to 10 hours prior to a storm event. These are just some displays of a larger roadway spray, which would go into one of the larger 6-wheel dump trucks. Carries about 1,065 gallons. So again, about 30 to 35 lane miles of roadway that you'd be able to treat with that. And then there's a smaller sprayer unit shown here. It's 450 gallons, which would go in a 1 ton or 550 dump truck. And this one's actually equipped with a hose reel as well, so you can do walkways or stairways at some of the public buildings and some of the tight areas of smaller roadways. So gain that benefit. So as far as the equipment cost, the brine maker, again, it's just under $50,000 for the purchase. 2 units for the self-loading de-ice sprayers. They're equipped with wheels at the front of it, so they could slide in and out of the dump trucks relatively easily. It only takes about 5 minutes for a setup. The other thing with these units is they are set up with a GPS speed sensor controller, so the application rate would be monitored, and it's controlled so you can tell what the vehicle speed is. The flow rate changes in relation to that, and it's capable of spraying 1, 2, or 3 lanes, and it'll maintain that same flow rate throughout. So the cost for those are just over $17,000 a piece with that controller unit all in, and then 2 5,000-gallon poly storage tanks to store the brine at the highway department, and there'd be some installation costs. I estimate to be about $6,500 for the electric hookups. We'd have to get a water hookup and set those things up in a somewhat permanent location, and then the freight is around $4,500 to freight those in. So we'd be looking at just over $100,000 to implement that type of system. And this is just showing the controls. So the brine maker itself runs on electricity. Highway garage is currently set up with a 3-phase service over there, so it would run this with ease. There's a salinity tap that you test as you're making this. You test the material. Doesn't have a PLS or anything like that. Any sophisticated type of computer operated monitoring for this. It's all pretty much manual, but once you get that salinity level to the right level as it goes through this process, it's relatively easy to keep it there. The people that distribute and market these actually do an on-site setup. They have phone support and whatnot as well. So, does anybody have any questions about anything related to the equipment or the setup or concept?
Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Johnson.
so I'd like to see this in terms of, return on investment. How many years to pay back, if there's a savings. Obviously you showed a side by side between rock salt and the brine, but then you mentioned that there would have to be potentially rocks, just regular rock salt dropped after the fact. So probably need to figure that in as well and run a side by side and see how long it's going to take to pay back.
So to that point, part of the benefit of this would be a reduction in labor cost, because again, you're achieving a better scrape down when you're doing the pre-treating of the de-icing beforehand. You're not realizing the need to use as much of the de-icers after the storm, because you're getting a better scrape down most of the time. You're not getting the same type of ice build, and in some instances you may not even need to make another application of rock salt or sand. So there's those benefits, and then because of the conversion rate, and I think you can see in the dollar amounts with the cost in the raw materials, you're actually moving towards reducing or eliminating the sand that the highway department currently uses. So there's a savings as far as sweeping at the end of the season, catch basin cleaning. It puts us closer to compliance as far as stormwater management, and quite frankly, the use of sand is becoming a thing of the past, and it really is becoming a mandate that it's not something that is a desirable thing to be doing to comply with the stormwater management regulations. And again, so there's other factors to consider as far as economics, and you're using about 25% of the material that's required, because you don't have that bounce with the other materials. That's just simply getting either plowed off or blown off to the edge of the roadway, and the brine is already in the form that is most desirable to work to de-ice or help to melt the snowpack. So you're using a lesser amount, and so in theory, it's more environmentally friendly, as well as economically sensible to do.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
so this sounds like a lot of opportunity on savings. So can we get your best estimate on that as part of the return on investment calculation?
Sure. I mean, again, there's a lot of other things to consider that, I basically would need more data than what's currently available to me from, historic records from the town, as far as, overall cost with what the town spent on sweeping and basin cleaning. Some of those things, they will, the cost for those will be reduced. Those need to be calculated into that, the overall cost of what has been spent in the past. And it's basically have to go on averages. Typically, as far as plowable events, from my experience, usually have about 10 to 12 plowable storms a year. Obviously, with treating for ice, that's done far more often. So that it's probably double the amount. Have to pour back into some of the other the older records with what the town spent in the past on rock salt or sand, and take all that stuff into consideration with what those costs are in relation to what the potential cost with this based on averaging. So certainly I could put together some more of that for the board.
Yeah, I think it tells a good story at town meeting if we're gonna ask for money for it.
Sure.
Anyone else have any questions? Mr. Marcy?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So, guys, would this be something we could potentially use because of the price, the capital improvement fund for? We have to kind of go through that process as well, Mr. Town Administrator.
Mr. Chairman,
I think if it's over 20,
I would
Sorry.
want to try to take a look at what we were retiring for debt off the DE1 before we hit capital improvement stabilization, especially
Okay.
for something over $100,000. But
Sure.
I think the treasurer can speak more to that. If there's a question about retiring debt, there's certainly going to be some room coming up.
Mr. Murray, have you looked at the green rock salt? The reason why I ask, a few years ago, I had done a lot of research on this. And if I remember right, the green rock salt costs about 15 or 20% more than regular rock salt, but yet it will melt about 20 degrees colder than regular rock salt. Have you looked at that at all? And I'm wondering how that compares to this brine system.
So, yeah, I have looked at that in the past. So basically, there's a wetting agent that they put on that they spray onto the salt. It does help a little bit. Typically, I think it's a magnesium based material, and it helps to lower the freezing point. There is a cost associated with that, and it does supposedly help as far as the bounce, or helps the salt stay in place a little bit better as well when it's pre-wetted. A lot of the highway, or actually for mass highway, any of the trucks that work on the interstate highways or state highways are required to have a sprayer unit that actually spray this wetting agent, which would be a brine or magnesium material, onto the salt as it's broadcast, and that helps as well. Again, it's another expense. It doesn't work quite as well as the liquid de-icer as far as pre-treatment, but it certainly does work, and it works to a lower temperature than just the plain rock salt itself. Whether it's worthwhile for the extra expense, I'm not really sure. I think if we're going to turn towards something like that, the saddle tanks and sprayers on the spreading equipment is probably a more beneficial, especially if you were set up with the liquid de-icers. It would probably be better to set up the trucks with the sprayer units. But certainly, I can make the cost comparison between any of the methods that you so choose.
So, Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Sullivan.
2 units would be enough for the town when they have to do a pre-treat or a de-icing event?
I believe so. Again, because you're able to cover the entire width of the roadway up with one pass, essentially. If you take a look, and I can bring it back up, if you look at the spray boom on the rear of the sprayer unit to the left, It actually has nozzles on the bottom and then off to both sides of the sprayer bar. And it's capable of covering 2 lanes, or even if you were on an interstate highway, it would cover 3-lane width.
So
So,
Jeff,
um,
how big is that? Sorry.
So it should be in a 4-hour shift. It would seem reasonable to expect that a couple of trucks could go out and pre-treat the entire town.
Jeff, how long are those bottom sprayers on each unit? You know what I mean? The one on the left has got the side sprays and the one on the right. What are those? Probably like 8 to 10 feet long, maybe?
They're just under 8 feet wide.
Okay. So that'd be a typical roadway if you're gonna do 2 passes.
And if you can see on the sides, there's actually sprayer nozzles that go up on both sides.
Right.
So they'll actually spray out to the side to another lane. And the way the unit that controls that is set up, it will spray a continuous pattern, and it will cover the same amount of area or maintain the same application rate, whether you're spraying 1 lane, 2 lanes, or 3.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, Jeff, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Jeff,
Yes.
this is a great job putting this together. I think this is definitely something we need to look at, sort of modernizing how we do things, especially if, as Mr. Johnson says, the proof's in the pudding, return on investment. If it's going to save us, is it a labor savings versus just straight product cost every year? That kind of stuff tells the story. I agree.
Okay.
So thanks, Jeff.
So also one other thing I had spoken to the board about, and I think at the last meeting, they had a couple of details on, you'd asked for a graphic on what I was suggesting for treatment on the side of the roadway. So this is just a sketch showing the edge of the roadways, just a basic design. It's showing loam, 4 inches of loam and grass behind the curb line between there and either the town's layout or the sidewalks. And this is basically showing a typical half section of a roadway up through a 50-foot easement. So, if the town or the highway department were to adopt a policy that, the typical road side of the road dressing would be behind the curb line, nominally to a 5-foot width from the face of curb to the property line or to the sidewalk. The typical treatment would be loam and seed or loam and grass. And then, if there happens to be a situation where property owners place some other type of treatment in that area, there may be, any number of types of treatment that they would put there. The town standard would be identified as loam and grass. And then that way there, if one of the other town departments, like the water and sewer department or utility, had one of their utilities in that area and there was some disturbance or there was some damage by the town in plowing, the policy would be to put back in place that 4 inches of loam and grass.
So, Mr. Chair,
Sullivan.
so Jeff, this is what you're proposing. This is what currently is in our regs, right?
I'm sorry?
This is what you're proposing. This is not what's currently in our regs, right?
No, it's not really identified in our regs. So, again, basically, I discussed with the board at the last meeting that, it seems like, sometimes residents may place something other than what the typical side treatment would be on the roadway of loam and grass. And then, if there's potentially damage that's done to that, somebody may not knowing that it's within the town's layout or the road layout. And again, some of the newer subdivisions that the town is either accepted recently or will be accepting through the street acceptance or street layout process. That if it's a 50-foot taking with a 24 or 26-foot paved course, it could be a 12 or 13-foot strip of town-owned property. And, then if there's other features that are placed within there, the town really doesn't want to be responsible for replacing, anything that would be over and above what the typical treatment would be, just the loam and grass. So it would be my suggestion for the board as the highway commissioners to adopt some type of policy like that, and may minimize the town's exposure as far as that's concerned.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can continue for a moment,
Certainly.
and this would go towards Mr. Scanlon. I don't have the subdivision control regs in front of me. Currently, outside of any waiver from the planning board, the town requires a 50-foot taking, right, Bill?
He's off the call, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, all right. Well, I believe they require a 50-foot taking, and at one time it was a 26-foot wide road, which would leave 24 feet, 12 and 12, assuming the road's centered. We all know through some subdivisions, well, maybe we all don't know, but sometimes the road isn't centered. But I thought these subdivision control regs took into consideration what Mr. Murray's showing, like the loam and grass to the sidewalk, and you always want to leave a little bit on the outside where it says 5 foot for bituminous concrete for the sidewalk. You always want to leave a little bit on the edge, the outer edge, in case you have to do some kind of work. You're not moving onto people's private property. I just wanted to talk to Bill, like I said, in the absence of waivers, because now we get down to, in some circumstances, I've seen 22-foot wide road with only one sidewalk with all loom and grass on the other side. And again, the road, that's assuming the road's centered in the middle. So I think some stuff is already covered in the regs, but I understand where Mr. Murray's going with this. I like it. I think if it's not completely codified, which I think a lot of it is, we need to look at that. And like I said, you have to take into consideration the outside of the sidewalk also, in case you have to do some kind of work. You won't be on people's property. And then when you do street trees, which is usually in that loom and grass, we need to take a look, because we can run into a situation like we did at the town hall, for example. When you don't plant the right trees, you get trees that spread over the roadway and or the sidewalk, which in theory becomes the town's obligation to maintain them. If you look at, I think it was like Dave's Way has that center island. There were some trees that kind of grow out, but the town hall is a perfect example. And as we all know, we had to do a lot of pruning and trimming down there, and some of those trees actually split. So I think it's a good place to start. I know we have to involve the planner and the planning board to make sure whatever's not in the regs already has to get in there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Sure,
Mr. Sullivan.
So, Steve, just through you, Mr. Chairman, I did speak briefly with Bill about that, and there are regs obviously in the planning documents, and subdivision control regs, but there really isn't a clear detail. So I think they kind of needs to better communication of that. If you look at what exists in there now, very difficult to read any of the notations or dimensioning. So again, I just think it needs to be clarified to alleviate some of the confusion there. And then the one last thing that I had was the typical driveway detail. that I discussed, and I've noticed with some of the driveways that I've gone to sign off on with on the building permits. Again, there isn't really a clear document in the application for a driveway permit that shows what the expectation is. So basically, I think this kind of clarifies it, that there actually needs to be an apron. And what this is showing is that basically at some point, at least at a 2.5 foot minimum dimension from the edge of the roadway or the curb line, the end of the driveway needs to be bermed up to a point at a minimum, at least to the height of the curb, which is what this graphic is showing in front of the detail. And then it should be to the to whatever the town standard is, 2-inch base course, 2-inch top course of paving. A lot of times, like probably the majority of I've maybe 6 or 8 driveways that I've gone to take a look at and sign off on already, just in the amount of time that I've been here. Typically, the builder tells me, well, I only own putting in the binder. When I sell the house, I do the binder course, and the homeowner is responsible for the top course of paving. If this falls within the town's layout, whatever that may be, at a minimum, the binder and top course should be there to ensure that the water is being held on the road, which is the intention of having the apron on the driveway. So, I don't know if you have any questions on that.
Anyone have any questions? No?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, Jeff, can you make me the host again?
Sure.
Thank you.
Are we good to go to the next item, Mr. Ruda? Are you all set? You're the host
I
now?
wanted to make sure that was presented to the highway commissioners before we
Okay.
started going down the road towards the capital improvement and warrant articles and so forth. So let's be, just to be clear, Mr. Chairman, what the highway commissioners would like to see more of a cost benefit analysis. Is that what we're going, return on investment, Mr. Johnson?
I'll let Mr. Johnson speak to what he said. I would like to see a comparison between the magnesium, the green salt, and regular rock salt and brine. Mr. Johnson, could you reiterate what you said previously, sir?
Yeah, I'd love to see a return on investment. I understand there's a lot of historical data that needs to be mined to do that, but what I think we have an opportunity here is everything I'm hearing says for some upfront capital, there's a long-term benefit, both in safety and the amount of time it takes to do the work. So, you get some additional variable costs come down. So to me, it feels like it's a safer product and for less money, but we need to prove that.
Thank you,
All right.
Mr. Johnson.
We'll put it on for the next time, Jeff. We'll be ready for it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Next up, we have notice of proposed acquisition on an agricultural preservation restriction on property in the town of Dudley. Per Mass General Law, Chapter 7C, subsection 37, a notice of proposed acquisition of an agricultural preservation restriction, APR, must be announced at a public meeting of the Board of Selectmen and read into the record. Property located at the east and west sides of Dresser Hill Road in Dudley, owned by Barbara R. Gomes. Total acreage, 3.9 acres plus or minus. This is for informational purposes only, and no vote shall be taken.
Mr. Chairman, if you recall, prior to probably, I don't know, Michelle, a few weeks before we got into the midst of the pandemic, we were trying to line up people from the Department of Agriculture to come in and explain the 61A taking for us. There's two aspects to it. One is the majority of it falls on the Commonwealth and the landowner, so the town really doesn't have any say in terms of what's classified as 61A, but if the town chooses to join with that and adopt it, there's an additional percentage, an additional amount of taxes that can be overcome with that 61A designation. What this is asking, what the Commonwealth is asking the town to do is to read this notice into the record that they are working directly with the homeowner, in this case, Mrs. Gomes, to classify that property as 61A chapters. Is it 61A? Rich, do you know off the top of your head?
I do not.
So there's this is the agricultural designation. I believe it's 61A as opposed to the open space, which is another designation. I believe this is the 61A designation that they're asking for this. So what the board is being asked to do is just simply read this into the record. Notice of acquisition.
And Mr. Chairman, through you to the town administrator, and what benefit does that have to the town and or the homeowner when this happens?
The benefit to the homeowner is that it's designated and taxed at a much lower rate as agricultural land.
Okay.
And the benefit to the town is subjective, I guess.
Okay. All right, thanks.
So the state actually purchases the rights to development for that it cannot be developed. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, yes. And that's the cleanest way to explain it.
Does that comes to the town?
The state designates that as agricultural land, which is just simply a lower tax rate. So if it's being taxed at a normal parcel right now, it would be taxed at a lower rate. The benefit to the state is that it's supposed to benefit the owner, and it's supposed to incentivize farming land.
Okay. Anyone else have anything on this?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
we should probably just understand what's the headwind for the town. Is it financial or any other obligations the town may have?
There's no obligation through the chair, but there will be a reduction in the taxes collected on those parcels.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
it would just be good to understand what that dollar amount is.
Let me run, Rudy. I will ask the assessor if she can make that adjustment and bring it to the next meeting. Or give it to me to bring to the next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Ruda. Do you need us to do anything else on this for now, or whatever action we can take can wait till then?
There's not going to be, I would say just read it into the record. It's not going to make any difference one way or another, except it'll delay and maybe antagonize the landowner. If you don't,
Mr. Chairman, I'm not expecting to delay it. I just want to understand.
Understood.
Mr. Chair, to kind of agree with what Mr. Johnson just said, I don't think there's any opposition on the board. I mean, more information is fine, but this has been an ongoing process for many months with this property owner, and I'm not trying to speak for the whole board. I don't think there's any opposition.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's a state policy, a state program. It makes sense. We just want to, just like was it last year around this time? I think that there was another presentation for some benefit to some town. It was agricultural. Was it if a farmer sold their farm and they would get 5% more through this program or something like that? And the due diligence for us is not to hold up a taxpayer landowner from taking advantage of these state or federal programs for that matter, but just to understand how that impacts the town. That's all.
I can certainly provide that information at the next meeting, Mr. Johnson, no problem. Seeing that we have this on the agenda and given notice, there's no reason why we couldn't read the notice into the record. All this is we're giving notice of proposed acquisition. We've just discussed it. Certainly public notice has been given. There's no hurt in reading the statement into the record that the Commonwealth is asking us to read.
Wasn't that what I read off of the agenda? Isn't that the statement?
Is there further statement, Michelle, or is that the whole shooting match?
I believe there's more to it. If you look at the document, I don't have it in front of me.
I have it in front of me. I'll share it.
I'm looking at it right now. And
Yeah, what part would we read?
it doesn't say.
In compliance with General Law, Chapter 7C, Section 37 of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, acting by and through its Department of Agricultural Resources hereby gives notice that it proposes to acquire an agricultural preservation restriction on the real property identified herein for the purposes of protecting in perpetuity its superior and productive agricultural resources by preventing their conversion to other uses. The application received by MDAR indicates that the property is owned by Barbara R. Gomes and consists of parcels located at the east and west sides of Dressel Hill Road in Dudley as approximately represented on the attached map. The APR may encompass all or parts of the area shown. The current use of the property is primarily for hay. Following the recording of this APR, the use of the subject property is limited to agricultural use as more particularly set forth in the APR document, General Laws, Chapter 184, Section 31, the Regulation of the Department, 330 CMR 22, Massachusetts Department of Resources by Michelle Padula, APR Regional Planner. So it's been read into the record, Mr. Chairman.
There we go. That must have been another page. Okay, so we're good to move on to the next one. Village Cemetery, authorize the town administrator to approve the use of archival preservation funds in an amount specified and requested by the Historical Commission for the purpose of planning and restoration of village cemetery.
Mr. Chairman, I'm recommending that the board vote to approve this. Mr. Bazinet, on behalf of the Historical Commission, is sent an email requesting that the board authorize the use. I'll read it. It's very quick. I recommend we put $5,000 toward the project. The project is the restoration of the flora and so forth out of Village Cemetery. They have an account that currently has almost $20,000 in it for archival restoration. That's project is somewhat behind. There's certainly enough money in there to help with the restoration of the flora in Village Cemetery. And they'd like to put some of it towards that restoration. So I leave it up to the board to approve that use.
The chairman.
Mr. Johnson,
Is it expected to be the sum of the project or just the
No.
first down payment?
Michelle has pursued some grant money through Janet Mauser and successfully secured a grant for them to use towards some of the restoration of the stone wall in front of Village Cemetery and a restoration of some appropriate flora, and they'd like to contribute some of their budget towards it. It's not going to be the entire project, but it will certainly get the project up and running. I mean, part of it, I believe, is going to be, we're in the design phase at this point, so the overall cost is not known.
okay. So what is it that you want from us going for this?
I'd like you to allow me to authorize the use of some amount of money, let's say up to $10,000 from the Archival Preservation Fund to restore, to work on the design and restoration of the Village Cemetery.
The chairman.
Yes, Mr. Johnson.
Is there any unexpected problems this will cause with the actual archiving of documents?
No, I don't. The Historical Commission has indicated that it will cause no problems. We're ahead of the game in terms of funding that project. And the good news is that we also have an anonymous donor that doubles for every $5,000 the town contributes. That donor doubles that amount. So I don't believe that jeopardizes any archival preservation whatsoever. And neither does the Historic Commission.
Mr. Ruda, doubles or matches?
Matches.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Marcy,
I move that we grant the town administrator permission to work with the Historical Commission on this project as they've laid it out.
Second.
I'll second that.
Jay did.
Any
Jay
discussion?
Johnson. Jay seconded it.
Oh, you did? I'm sorry, I didn't see the little microphone mute thing come off. I didn't hear you, sorry. All right, any discussion on that?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, to the administrator, this is part of our pledge to work with the Historical Commission to right the wrong up there.
That's correct, Mr. Sullivan.
as some people saw it. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Thank you.
Anything else? Hearing none, roll call vote.
John Marcy, aye.
Jay Johnson, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Carrie Siganovich, unanimous. Next up, fiscal year 22 budget season kickoff, town administrator priorities and budget timeline. Mr. Ruda.
Mr. Chairman, I sent you a copy of this email, of this memo today. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. I also forwarded it this evening to the rest of the board. Our FY22 budgeting cycle has begun today. I sent a memo out to the department heads. Essentially, the memo goes over a budget timeline, begins on March 5th, which will be the deadline for departments to submit draft budgets to the town accountant and the town administrator. 3/5 through 3/12, we'll sit down and meet with those department heads. And then capital improvement requests will be deadlined at 3/15 on 3/15. And then it goes throughout the normal FAA capital improvement meeting process, culminating with a spring town meeting on May 24th. This year, I kind of started to go over what we do know about what next year's budget will look like. We will likely remain close to the public until we get to the final phase of vaccinations. This is part of the guidance I give the department heads. Both the Commonwealth and the federal government is stating that we will likely not be looking at universal vaccinations being available to the general public until June or July of 2021. So we're going to probably remain on the same footing we are now for at least the next few months, probably somewhat into the next fiscal year. The impact of the pandemic will likely impact all our service models throughout the end of the calendar year, as I just said. While we do not have a full look at our revenues for this fiscal year, it is likely that certain revenues, as I mentioned earlier, such as permitting, building, land lease, and host community agreements, will fall into a category of being less than what we projected for this fiscal year. We can plan on beginning the new fiscal year at a deficit as we await reimbursement for the FEMA eligible pandemic related costs. Right now, that's about $126,000 deficit. The fire chief informs me that we're looking at over $50,000 potentially so far in FEMA reimbursement, so that'll reduce us. We're up against the clock. That'll hopefully reduce us going into the new fiscal year with a deficit. And as I mentioned, that work is just ongoing every day with the fire chief and the assistant chief.
Mr. Administrator. That's
Pretty
just
much
the,
full-time
Mr.
job.
Administrator. That's just the first payment. We have 2 more payments submitted that should be in after that as well.
Right, and again, it's a calendar issue right now, so we're up against the deficit. We're trying to reduce that deficit, but the fiscal year doesn't wait for FEMA to reimburse us, so it's just a matter of chasing money at this point to get those reimbursements on the books. So I asked, to the extent possible, department heads with contractual increases above 2.5% in the bottom line, I've asked them to justify those contractual increases or market cost increases that are beyond his or her control, which is not, far beyond what we normally ask. I've set some priorities out for the board to take a look at. We should set a priority in assisting, facilitating, and providing for all members of the community that want a vaccination or receive one. Of course, there's a cost associated with that, as the board knows, and the priority will reflect the cash flow required to provide the service in advance of the reimbursement and support a full reopening of the town hall to the public. Second priority is to complete the technical advances cybersecurity program and online service models that were initiated in advance as a factor of the COVID-19 pandemic. And what I mean by that is we had to quickly buy a lot of technology and make a lot of security improvements, switch to a more remote model, a more universally accessible model, not necessarily in person, And now, having spent that money, most of it from the CARE Act, we certainly have an obligation. It would be a shame if we let those models collapse or go because we didn't budget properly to maintain that modernization. So I think that's an important element of our FY22 budget. And then we'd have a priority on modernizing staffing and operational models that would better support the needs of local businesses in the community and provide for ongoing mechanisms to build cash reserves. So those are my 4 priorities as part of the budget memo I sent out to department heads today. And I think that they accurately reflect a lot of the public policy that the Board of Selectmen has espoused over the last year or so. That's the budget kickoff, Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Excellent.
Chairman? Mr.
Yes,
Chairman
Mr.
and Mr. Administrator, John, I think you're aware of this, but we're still working on getting that upfront money for the immunizations. We're still gonna work that model in that formula and try to get that money up front if the vaccines are ever released to the local municipalities. I was talking to Paul about that late last week. We're still looking into that. We're talking to our rep.
So what the chief is, Mr. Chairman, what the chief is talking about is that we've asked, FEMA provides for an advance on projected spending, and there's a formula associated with that advance that we've asked for from FEMA. We're working on submitting for that advance, but again, it's coming from the federal side, so even an advance is not necessarily what you would think of as an advance. It may take a month or so for us to get it, but certainly it will, putting in for it now will help offset any sort of deficit that we have going into the next fiscal year. And I think that right now that should be the primary focus.
Excellent. Anyone have anything else? Any questions? No? Okay. You don't need us to do anything with this. This is just a
I just want to make sure,
just a
Mr.
heads
Chairman,
up for what's to come, correct?
yeah, it's a pretty quick turnaround based on past years. We probably knocked about a month out of the process. I have no doubt we can easily meet that timeline. But I just want to make sure everybody has the memo so that we can, make every effort to get quorums at meetings and so forth and continue to work the process, which again begins on March 5th internally. And for the submission of the town warrant, we'd be looking at April 26th to submit that to town council for review. So basically our joint meeting and hearing processes would be relatively completed by April 5th. We could probably sneak another meeting in there if we really need to, but so you're talking about a month turnaround time. I don't think that that's too much to ask at this point. I think we can do that pretty quickly.
Okay. Sounds good. Next on the agenda, board members' comments. Mr. Sullivan.
I just want to, give a little plug to the highway department. They bunch of little nuisance storms, a couple big ones, but they've been on top of it. And again, it seems like when nobody calls to complain, they must be doing a good job. So keep up the good work. And then to public safety personnel, same thing. I know we got a letter of correspondence recently from a resident praising the quick response on a 911 call, and not that we would expect anything less, but both departments doing a good job.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Johnson.
I just want to talk about a somber number, 500,000 COVID-related deaths in the United States. Not a number we expected a year ago today. So what are you supposed to do? And pray for federal and state leadership to do what they need to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Marcy.
Mr. Sullivan said it best. I just want to thank you. When we're not getting calls, we're doing something right. So thanks to Highway Department, and yes, thanks to our public safety for. We have to call that stuff out. Catch people doing something good, and just so the public knows that we don't always just talk about problems. We talk about what does go right in the town. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Marcy. I'd like to piggyback a little bit on Mr. Johnson. He mentioned about the 500,000 COVID deaths. It's 500,000. That's, like he said, unfathomable a year ago. But on the town's website, there's a red banner at the top. If you would like a vaccine, if you have not signed up yet, please go there and do so. There are people getting vaccines in order as how the rollout goes. It's a great thing. A lot of people did a lot of work behind the scenes, and kudos to them for getting that done. Please take advantage of that. If you'd like a vaccine, go on the red banner, follow the prompts. It's not that hard. Like Mr. Johnson said, do what's right. Next up, departmental communication. Mr. Carmignani, can I peel you away from your paperwork? Do you have anything, sir?
I love paperwork.
Yes, you
Thank
do.
you, Mr. Chairman. So I need to start off. We borrowed some money and we did it at a great rate, and we had a very short turnaround. So for the 3 selectmen and the 4th who signed, and the other one who I just missed, and the town clerk, it's really good that under these conditions, this has got to be the 3rd or 4th time we've turned around a short-term note pretty quickly. So I have to thank you and everyone else for making that happen. There was a joke there with the town clerk that she's getting her experience very quickly. On other notes, thank you to the Board of Health assistants and everybody who's very politely queued up at the kiosk. I noticed 3 and 4 cars deep. Today was just not a banner day. It was rainy, it was sleet, it was snowing, and the report in from our agent out in the kiosk is that everybody was polite, smiled, and nodded. So that is a good thing. I thank everybody in the town hall who has received an irate telephone call meant for me. We're doing our best to make sure that everything gets answered. People with the best information. I'll opine for just a second. A whole lot of people like to go in and get their bills stamped for what it's worth. It's that connection. You're part of a community. You come in and you do that. Fingers crossed that the town administrators got us on a plan where we resume some sort of normalcy, if you'd want to call it that, even though over-the-counter service in today's modern age is probably a bit old-fashioned. That's why the town hall runs the way it does. It's Dudley, so that's a good thing. Administratively, not too much to report. We have, back on the debt, Mr. Ruda had made mention of the DE1. Quickly, the town of Dudley has some debt excluded items. We have a lot of those items trailing off, reducing each year, and we have some that are going to come off. So in the next month or two in the budget process, you are going to see some references to the recap sheet, the DE1. We'll try to get some explanations out there as to simpler terms, what this means. The hope is that we can do more things with a similar tax rate. And I think that's about as simply as we can put it. I've had one or two discussions recently with the town administrator on things like that. We need to stay the course. As much as we're in a pandemic, this shouldn't be the year that we don't stick to the plan, or if we deviate from the plan, it should be modestly, because what we don't take action on in this year is something we need to play catch up on for next year. Beyond that, everyone stay safe. Big smiles. Now's the time. If you haven't received a bill, please let me know. Send an email, make a telephone call. I'm happy to remail something. Post office does a great job, but if we have the wrong address or what have you, we're happy to address a plain envelope and make sure it gets to go where it needs to. Other than that, everyone stay safe. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Rich. Mr. Murray, do you have anything else?
I think I'm all set. I just wanted to say thank you to the members for the appreciation, and I'll pass that along to the employees as well.
Thank you. Police Chief, what do we have, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't really have a whole lot this evening, but again, just kudos to my guys and both of the other departments, fire department, highway department, for all the assistance and the work over the last month or so. It's been very busy doing just regular calls for service, but then the weather seems to be happening every other day. So that was something that was really a concern for all of us to still be answering calls and everything going from point to point. Just one other thing to kind of keep in mind, I think, for some of the residents, and I put out something in my article recently. A lot of scams that are taking place in regards to social security numbers, still unemployment benefits. It's tax season now, so people are going to be starting to file their taxes. So they might be getting calls from folks about different things with that stuff. So just be very cognizant of those things, that very few government entities do business over the phone. So there's always a way to research anything like that to make sure you protect your personal information, and watch for those types of things. Even some of the caller IDs are coming up with Town of Dudley or Dudley Police Department or whatever, sometimes showing up where people are basically ghosting the phone numbers and having those things appear. So just something for residents to be aware of, that these things are taking place. Don't give out your personal information over the phone. Guide that very closely, and certainly call and ask questions if need be. That's about it for me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Fire Chief, do you have anything, sir?
Yeah, real quick, just to go back to immunizations, I just wanted to let the board know, I'm sure the administrator has let you know, we've been working closely with the Board of Health. If the state does release the vaccines to local municipalities, we are set and ready to go. We could set up a vaccination center in a matter of hours. We have the freezer. It's maintaining its temperature to keep the vaccine. We've been working closely with Jamie Terry. They've been doing a great job. Jamie Terry's worked really hard. Roberta Johnson's worked really hard. I think they deserve the recognition. I know I mentioned it in one other meeting, but I think they go above and beyond what they're actually tasked to do, and they put a lot of effort into it. So I think they need to be recognized again. But I just want the board to know that, and the townspeople, that if the vaccine does get released, we're ready to go. But the people need to keep in mind that the state's restricting us, so we really have no control over it right now. And that's all I have, unless anybody has questions for me.
Well, through the chair, I mean, just the fact that, Chief, that we were ready to go, like we set up our own vaccination registration, and like with the town administrator leading that, and then, your team ready to pick that up at a moment's notice, says a lot. So we're ready once the state figures it out. So thank you, guys.
George, Mr. Petrinos, do you have anything, sir?
Just something from some historical value. If you remember last year, or maybe even before that, I came before the board with a problem over on our Eisenhower Drive subdivision. That was a road that wasn't accepted. Neither was the sewer pump station accepted. It's been a long struggle. and with the help of Bill Scanlon and Mr. Ruda, we were able to get some help from the developer in conjunction with ourselves to develop a plan to at least maintain and then revamp that station, which we've done for the most part. It's probably about 3/4 of the way done now. And we just put 2 brand new pumps in there because they both had failed over the holidays. And we avoided what could have been a big catastrophe of having a real problem, plus with the neighborhood. So right now, I'm glad to say at least that station is in working order. It is monitored by us, but still not accepted. And maybe someday down the line, once we finish the work, which we've kind of obligated ourselves to do, we will accept it with the road when that's accepted too. So that's sort of good news there. So right now we don't have to worry about any unexpected emergencies.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Next up, we have the student representative, Colin.
Good evening. Today, students returned from last week's school vacation and are continuing with hybrid Model A. Coronavirus cases are trending downward in our community and across the state. And at Shepherd Hill, we are continuing to prepare to enter hybrid Model C, which is currently scheduled to begin on Monday, March 15th. Hybrid Model C will combine all cohorts. All students will be in the building for class Monday through Friday from 7:30 to 11:15 a.m. Students will then go home for lunch, and grab-and-go lunches will continue to be free and available for all students every day. Students will attend classes online from 12:15 to 2:25 p.m. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, while Wednesday afternoon will remain dedicated for independent work time and teacher development. Under the new model, students will continue to adhere to physical distancing of no less than 3 feet, with most classrooms being no less than 4 feet. In order to prepare, parents recently completed 2 parent surveys, one being transportation related and the other indicating whether they intended to enroll their students in the hybrid model or the full remote model for the remainder of the year. Our school custodians worked hard over the break to move extra desks into the classrooms to accommodate the new model. Over the next few weeks, building and district officials will work to accommodate student transportation and parking for student drivers. I will give more of an update on how preparations for Model C are coming along at our next meeting on March 8th. For sports, the boys and girls basketball teams just completed their abbreviated 2021 seasons. The boys basketball team celebrated 6 seniors for their dedication to the program, those being Daniel Brooks, Camden Hackett, George Karamanakis, William Tyrell, Nicholas Corrales, and Matthew Ethier. The girls basketball team unfortunately had to cut their season short due to COVID protocols, but I offer a big congratulations to both teams on their great seasons. Fall 2 sports are finishing up signups and will begin their season soon. Those include football, cheerleading, volleyball, and indoor track. I would like to give a big thank you to our athletic director, James Scanlon, as well as all of our dedicated coaches for helping to make our athletic seasons possible during these difficult situations. That's all I have for tonight. I look forward to continuing to update you as we finish up the year. Thank you for your time, and if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.
We certainly won't, Colin. Thank you very much. Next up, looks like we're going to adjourn into executive session. Would anyone like to read us into executive session, please?
Mr. Chairman, just before we do that, the plan is that Michelle is going to let those that are joining us in executive know to do so, and we're going to establish another Zoom meeting, which everyone should have the invitation for. If you don't, let me know and I'll resend it. Is that right, Michelle?
Yeah, I have it.
Okay.
So you guys must have it.
Yeah, I've got it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Marcy.
I move that we convene into executive session under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if any open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. The Dudley Police Association, not to reconvene in public session.
I'll second that. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote.
John Marcy, aye.
Carrie Siganovich, aye.
Jay Johnson, aye.
Sullivan, aye.
Good night, everyone.
Everybody.